This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we find out once and for all if Roger Waters is an anti-Semite. We talk with author Faith Moore about her fascinating new book, Christmas Karol, with a K. You know, I thought I was burned out in all those Scrooge stories. Well, turns out I was wrong. Very wrong. And I share how the classic TV show The Office crushed one of TV's toughest challenges.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we start, I'd love it if you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. We've got new episodes every Wednesday, plus more bonus episodes coming in caliente. And that's the extent of my Spanish. You know, obviously we're living in pretty dark times, but there's one pet peeve that stands out to me. I can't get used to it. These days, you can call anyone you want a racist, a bigot, a sexist, or something even nastier, and you don't really need much proof to back it up. Sometimes people just hurl those charges without any evidence, nothing. Heck, people were calling Donald Trump Hitler ever since he first descended that escalator back in 2015. The dude had 4 years to get his Hitler on. What'd he do? Well, during the COVID pandemic, he gave more power to the states. And of course, he let the swamp swallow him whole. Worst Hitler ever. But that all comes to mind when the topic turns to Roger Waters. Of course, he's the Pink Floyd legend. He's routinely called an anti-Semite in the press, on social media, again and again and again. You know, it makes me a little uncomfortable. Listen, he hates the Israeli government. I get it. You can hate a government. You can be critical of it. He sides with the Palestinians. Again, he may be wrong, but, he can have that opinion. I think he is wrong. It doesn't make him an anti-Semite. Except the evidence keeps piling up and up and up. And now we're at the point where it's uncomfortable not to consider the fact that he's an anti-Semite. And now Roger's made the problem even worse. He spoke to journalist Glenn Greenwald recently, and it's no shock that the topic of the Israeli-Hamas situation came up and the October 7th atrocities that Hamas committed. I can't still get my brain wrapped around what happened that day. But what the musician said on that topic, it might make the hair on your arm stand up, or give you goosebumps, or just make you sick?
When the attack on October 7th in Israel happened from Hamas, what was your reaction to that?
Let's wait and see what happened. Well, it was my first reaction. My second reaction was, how the hell did the Israelis not know this was going to happen? And I'm still a little bit down that rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. I mean, didn't the Israeli army in those 10 or 11 camps hear the bangs when they blew up whatever they had to blow up to get across the border? Mm-hmm. There's something very fishy about that.
Do you think what Hamas did on October 7th can be justified?
Well, we don't know what they did do, but was it justified for them to resist the occupation? Yeah. But again, it's what you said, it's the Geneva Conventions. They're absolutely legally and morally bound to resist the occupation since 1967. It's an obligation.
But are there limits on the way in which they can resist?
As I said in the statement that I put out after it, I said, if war crimes were committed, I condemn them.
Do you think there's been evidence that's emerged that suggests they committed those?
There may have been individuals. I was reading a news story this morning, which Grey Zone, our friend Max Blumenthal. So there's a long story which I read this morning, but Haaretz have finally come out with figures of how many people were actually killed and who they were.
On that day,
On that day, yeah. And so probably the first 400 were Israeli military personnel. That is not a war crime.
No, but what about targeting civilians or abducting them?
No, of course not. No, right. Of course I don't condone that. But the thing was thrown out of all proportion by the Israelis making up stories about beheading babies.
There's a lot to process here. First of all, the clip I'm using came from Twitter, and it was definitely edited, so it wasn't a smooth conversation. It goes from topic to topic. But to the best of my knowledge, I've read some of the quotes. It's not edited in a way that makes him say things he didn't really say. Those are his opinions. It just made it a little bit tighter conversation. You know, during wartime, facts can get a bit fuzzy, what they call the fog of war. But we have so much evidence that Hamas did exactly what everyone thinks they did and what the Israeli government is saying they did. We've seen the videos, courtesy of the Hamas terrorists who were so proud of their raping and their killing and their torture. You know, in recent times, we've had a lot of conversations about, well, how do you separate the art from the artist? And to me, I think the deal breaker is Bill Cosby. Grew up loving Bill Cosby. Who didn't love Bill Cosby? He's an institution, but we all know what he's accused of. And there's just too much evidence to deny it. So, but generally speaking, it is a complicated conversation. There are many, many artists who have given us just timeless pieces of work, and they're either tortured souls or just absolutely awful people. Name check Roman Polanski, the director who admitted to child rape. But you know what? When it comes to Roger Waters, I think we have a verdict on the case of what he has to say and what his critics allege. I don't even think I have to read it aloud. It's pretty clear at this point. I think we all have our favorite version of A Christmas Carol, the classic timeless seasonal tale. For some, it's the Bill Murray version. That's the 1988 comedy Scrooge. Great title. It's funny, it wasn't a hit back in the day, but definitely has grown over time. Some people adore the Muppets version. How do you not like the Muppets? Or they say, hey, George C. Scott, great actor. His 1984 version, that is the ultimate take on A Christmas Carol. For me, maybe it's a little unconventional, but it's Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol. I watched it nonstop as a kid, and those songs I just can't help loving. But there's a new variation on the classic story. It's called Christmas Carol with a K by Faith Moore. Now, Faith is a whip-smart editor, and now she's a novelist, and her debut is winning, and I have to say, a bit creepy at times, on purpose. There are some really tense moments in the book, but that's based on the story. I mean, ghosts and chains and regret, all those things can be a bit overwhelming, and it really is captured quite well in the story. Christmas Carol follows a type A mom who learns what she's losing by working around the clock and ignoring her lovely family. It is a cautionary tale, and even though it really does speak to our current age, I have a suspicion people are going to be reading this and enjoying it and connecting with it for years and years to come. She just so happens to be the daughter of the great Andrew Klavan, who was just on this show a week or so ago. But Faith is a first-rate novelist in her own right, full stop. Let's give her complete and total credit because she deserves it. And I'm so happy to have her on the show and have her share her story about the creation of Christmas Carol with you right now. Faith, thanks for joining the show and congratulations on the new book, which I understand was written during your youngest son's nap. So I want to start there because I remember as a father, as a new father, I felt like I got more discipline than I ever had before. I think discipline for me was an issue, and I had no time for it. And I'm kind of curious, as a writer, as a creator, was it hard for you to turn those creative engines on during those times? Or did you find that it's go time, I've got to get this done? That's the way it worked.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me.
Sure.
And I appreciate that. I really, people have asked me that a lot. Like, wow, like, you're saying you wrote this during your kid's nap time. How did you do that? When my kid goes to sleep, I'm exhausted or whatever. For me, it felt like a break.
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of have what I now have come to understand was sort of like a ritual. I didn't mean it this way, but I would kind of make up a cup of tea. I have a little like one person teapot and a little teacup with a saucer. And I would make my tea and I would come upstairs and sit down at my computer and drink my tea and write. And it was kind of just like switching on my grown-up self or switching on my creative self. And I really enjoyed that time. So, I would like to say like, yeah, it was really hard. It was really difficult, but I did it. But really it kind of felt like a dream. Like it felt like a break for me. And I feel really lucky to have been able to do that.
Society is so interesting, and maybe I use that with an asterisk, but with this whole notion of we can have it all, we can do this, we can do that, we can have the careers and be a full present parent and do everything we need to do. And that's not right. We've got to make choices. We've got to have balance. It's a great theme for any book, obviously, and you do a deep dive into it here. But I was kind of curious, did you have any real world inspirations for this? Maybe even a moment in your own personal life where you thought, I really want that dream. I want to do this better. And then you had to pull back and say, hey, wait a minute, this is not the way life works. I've got other far more important responsibilities as a parent, as a mom, as all the important things.
Well, it's funny because for me, this is kind of all I've ever wanted to do, being a stay-at-home mom. Now, I wanted to write, but I really wanted to be a mom, and I wanted to stay home with my kids. And the minute I got pregnant, I was a teacher. I had been teaching for about 10 years, and I got pregnant with my first son, and I said, okay, that's it. And I quit, and I've been home ever since. So it wasn't so much something that I was grappling with. But, what actually happened was the idea for this book came to me during the pandemic. And what happened was all of the parents, all the working parents came home. And suddenly everyone was at home with their kids, trying to work full time remotely from home and also parent their kids full time at home, because at least here in New York, no one was seeing anybody. Nobody was going anywhere. And, I did hear a lot of comments from parents I knew about how hard this was. Of course, it's hard. You can't, as you were just saying, you can't have it all. You can't full-time parent and full-time work. It's impossible. So there was a lot of that. But what I really noticed, and I was surprised to notice, was how many comments I was hearing about how wonderful it was for these parents to suddenly be home with their kids, hearing and seeing all of the things that their kids do on a daily basis, all day long, that they just hadn't ever seen or witnessed before, because their kids were at school or at daycare or with nannies. And they were, I was just hearing a lot, because of course this was my normal, even though it wasn't normal to be sort of stuck in our house, but it was normal for me to see this wide range of my kids' experience. For them, this was new. And they were talking to me and to each other about how much they were appreciating that. But when the pandemic ended, everybody just kind of went back to work. I think maybe with a few exceptions, everybody just kind of said like, okay, well, that was an interesting interlude, and off they go again to work. And so I think it was more kind of about that. It was about, what would it take to have someone need to kind of step back from that mentality that I think a lot of us are kind of schooled in, that mentality of like, you graduate, you go to work, you keep working, that's success, and you have kids along the way. What would it take to step back from that and maybe reevaluate?
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you, and this may be a dumb question, but the Dickens story, it's a classic story. It's been retold many, many times, and this is a really fresh spin on it, obviously. Are there any legal hassles when it comes to recreating the bones of this story? I know you've done your homework. I'm just curious, because I think that other people might question that too. Like, I know there are certain projects in the, I guess, cultural landscape that we have access to, and there's a legal, maybe the rights, go away after 100 years or so. But what's the story with this particular one? Because obviously it's been told so many times, and there's so many different ways to kind of get into it.
That's a great question, and nobody's asked me that before. So books go into the public domain. I think it's 100 years after the last person who had the rights to it is gone, or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. It's 100 years after some specific thing has happened. So this book is in the public domain, which gives you a lot more free reign than you would have if you were trying to write a retelling of, something that just came out yesterday. Right, you can't really do that. So there weren't actually really any legal considerations for me in retelling this story, because it's in the public domain. But I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't allowed.
So my Harry Potter fan fiction is going to be in some trouble, I guess. Moving
exactly. Forward. I'm terribly sorry. You're going to have to hang on to that.
Well, let's look at this. This whole Scrooge motif is so interesting, and like I said, we've had so many different variations on it. What is it about that core, the kernel of the story, that is so irresistible, that makes us want to revisit it again, and often do it so well, and have so many, this isn't just a material that's been beaten to death and every new incarnation is a bore. Every time I see a new version, I'm like, oh, I understand why that's needed or necessary, or that's a really clever way to kind of extend the story. What is it about that tale that really has been fascinating us for so long?
Well, for me, the thing that's most interesting about the story is that even though Ebenezer Scrooge goes through this sort of big journey through his past and present and future, he encounters all of these supernatural spirits and he has this amazing experience. At the end of it, when he wakes up from, the ghost of Christmas future and he's back at home and everything is, it's not the horrible future that he has envisioned of, in that story, he's dead, so he's still alive. The amazing thing for me is that in reality, nothing has actually changed for him.
Mm-hmm.
He's still an old man. His fiance left him long ago. That's still true. His nephew has still grown up without him. All of the things that kind of made him bitter and that kind of changed him throughout his life are still true. He doesn't get to go back in time and relive his life again. The one thing that has changed for him is his perspective on the world and his priorities about what really matters and what doesn't. And for me, that was the thing that was so profound and so important about the story. And that's when I started to think, what would it be like for a mom who's kind of gotten so wrapped up in this workaholic kind of, girl boss type narrative? What would it be like if she was able to have that kind of Scroogian shift and take a step back from her life and make some changes? What would that be like? So for me, it was that kind of core notion that was so interesting and inspiring.
And one of the other templates that we're working with here is fear, fright. There are some creepy sequences in this story throughout the ages. Maybe the Mr. Magoo one is not nearly as frightening, but still a beloved one in my life. But your book is scary at times. I mean, there's some really suspenseful scenes, and the way you build the tension is excellent. I was kind of curious if you had any, maybe there were films you've seen over the years that inspired you, or even maybe books you've read that you thought, oh, I really want to create that kind of dread that those books and movies evoked.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think really the film that inspires this book, and this might be a sort of cop-out answer, but the film that inspired this book is the film of A Christmas Carol with Alistair Sim from, I think it's the 1950s. It's a film that my family watched sort of religiously every year since I was a child. And it too is very scary. It's kind of scary. It's so scary that when I was a child, I had to kind of stop watching it. It was too frightening for me. And I had to come back to the family tradition later when I was a little bit more able to handle it. So, I think I really was just sort of going for that, which also is kind of going for the actual Dickens story, is those kinds of elements of the supernatural, that suddenly there's something out there that you don't really know, you don't really understand, and you didn't really know it was out there to begin with, and suddenly you're faced with it. And I think for me, it was more that kind of trying to pull that feeling from that film and from the book itself into the modern day.
Gotcha. It's so interesting how the things that we watch and absorb in our childhood never go away. I mean, I'm still a Monkees fan. I grew up on the Monkees music, and I know that makes me ridiculous, but sometimes these things stick. Now, your father, Andrew Clavin, no relation obviously, is an accomplished writer, and I'm using that term mildly. He's great. When you grow up in that family, when your dad is so accomplished in one specific skill set, and then you come along and say, boy, I like to write too. I'm an editor as well. Is there ever a fear that, gosh, I don't care how good I am, I can't be as good as my dad, or does it all happen so organically there's no even questioning of the process?
Well, yes. I mean, I think I probably will never be as good as my dad, and I think that that's clear, and so we don't have to worry about it anymore. But both of my parents are and were incredibly supportive of me. My dad would read what I wrote when I was a kid. And he, I always appreciated that, he never just sort of patted me on the head and said, good job. He would say, wow, this is great. But then he would really treat me like an adult person who was coming to him for notes, and he would really help. And my mom is an amazing editor. I still send my writing to her to edit. So, I think really what was so wonderful about growing up in the family that I got to grow up in was that I knew all along that this is something that you can grow up to do. You can grow up to write stories. That's a viable career path, in a way that I think you might not know if you grew up in a family of lawyers, for example. So, I think, will I ever be as good as him? No, but that's okay.
Well, you're pretty good as is, so you don't have to worry about that.
Thank
But,
you.
your book is not a lecture. It's a story. It has some lessons built in for sure. Can you talk about that balance? I'm always intrigued by that because, I spoke to John Nolte recently for the show, and he talked about
Yeah, I heard that interview. That was great.
not getting on on a soapbox, and that this is exactly what he hates when people on the left do it. He certainly didn't want to do it there, and you obviously don't do it as well. But there are certainly, when you embrace the book and the story, you get a feeling, you get a sense of what you're trying to share with people. How do you work that balance? How do you make sure that there are not passages that maybe share too much, finger wag too much, even your best intentions, where none of us are perfect? How do you kind of work that sense of moderation when you're just really just trying to tell a story first and foremost?
Well, I think that's the key, is that you're trying to tell a story. It's funny now that it's out there in the world, we can talk about all of the themes and the kinds of, what was I trying to say, or what can we learn from this or that. But I think if you go into writing a novel with that, like a message, I want people to understand that, staying home with your kids is a good idea. If that's the message that you go in hoping to achieve, I think you're going to fail. I don't think that you're going to write something that is worthwhile as a story, because I think a story is something that you can't say in a sentence. If you could say it in a sentence, why not just say it in a sentence?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I didn't set out to write a story with a specific message. And so I think that was really helpful, because I wasn't thinking all the time as I was writing, like, oh, how can I weave in, this part of my message, or this theme, or how can I tell everyone what I'm really trying to say? I really wasn't thinking that. And I think that people often do sit down to write stories with that in mind, like, this is the message I want my reader to get. And I think that's a mistake. So for me, I'm glad that it doesn't sound preachy, or that I'm not kind of trying to hit you over the head with something. But for me, it was sort of because I really wasn't trying to.
Mm-hmm.
I had a story to tell. And if in telling the story, there are some messages that come through, great, but they might be different messages for different people.
Yeah, I think some of the best art is often so diverse in its themes that you could tease out different ideas and different lessons and different takeaways from them. I always point to Dead Man Walking. One of my favorite movies was, created by a fellow who I'm sure was anti-death penalty. But I remember seeing it at the time, and though my views on the death penalty have changed since then. But I thought, this is about the death penalty, because this character only found his soul because he was forced with this horrible, sentence. And, it was just so interesting, because I knew that director wanted me to come away with a certain feeling, but he was such a good artist that he opened it up to everyone, which I think is great. One of the things I try to do in this show is to be positive, and I feel like it's not easy these days, because you look around at the culture, we're talking about a book, and you have sensitivity readers, and I talk to comedians all the time who have to watch what they say or else, and of course a lot of celebrities have to have the right opinion or else again. Do you, as someone who's in the arts and steeped in this culture, do you see any silver linings here? Is there any sense that this cultural fever is going to break soon, or are you as pessimistic as I am sometimes?
Gosh, well, I will just say personally that I feel really lucky in that the Daily Wire was willing to take on this book, because I feel like they are one of the places where I do see a silver lining. I think that's where the silver lining is, in creating these places where people can just tell stories, and just, and even if, as you say, even if you don't always agree with what they're saying, or you're not sure if you agree, or you're not really sure what they're saying, but it's a good story. I think those are the places where we can start to get a little bit more of a foothold. And so I feel really lucky to have been given this opportunity in this way, because I at least did not have to have to worry about that. You know, the story that I wanted to tell was the story that they were willing to have me tell. And so I think, I mean, I guess that's a silver lining in some way, and that there are places like that cropping up. And I hope that there will be more to come.
It's so interesting you say it like that, because you would think, of course, you tell the story you want to tell. How would that be different? But we obviously living in an age where there are other layers and complications that factor into that. Now, one of the things that you also do when you're not writing novels and doing the work you do, you're an editor for hire. And I'm curious, when you are in that position and all these different people are coming to you with their stories and their questions and the things that they're tackling, are you seeing any themes emerging, subjects that writers are really itching to explore? Because you have kind of a unique perspective on this.
That's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of fantasy going on. People are really hoping to explore, I think, big themes and ideas in fantasy. A lot of kind of back to the sort of the good guy, good versus evil, that kind of thing. I see a lot of that in the books that I edit. And, I think I that's encouraging too. I do a lot of writing about fairy tales. And I think that, going back to those roots of just kind of like the hero's journey, the kind of ultimate evil and fighting evil and, good shall prevail. And all of those kinds of things are where we kind of should be and need to be going. And I do think I'm seeing that more and more as I edit.
That's interesting. I want to end with a nerdy question, because you're a word person, and as am I. Can you share a quick writing tip for the public at large? Listen, we all have to write in some capacity. I do it for a living. You do it as well. Others aren't as enmeshed in this world, but they still have to write something. They have to write emails back and forth. It's always a good skill to have if you can, spit polish your writing techniques. Anything that comes to mind, either maybe something you're seeing a lot of in your work where you're frustrated, like, oh, quit making this mistake. This is something easily correctable. Anything like that come to mind?
Okay, there are two. The biggest mistake that people make all the time is like lay versus lie.
Oh, that's a tough
like
one.
lay, laid, lane, all of that. I actually have a video on that, so people can just go and check that out, because it drives me crazy, because there is an actual answer and people get it wrong all the time. There's that. And then punctuating dialogue or quotations, like where the punctuation goes in the quotation marks. In English, in American English, we never ever put the punctuation outside of the quotation marks unless it's a question where the question mark is not part of the actual quotation. So hopefully that was helpful. I also have a video on that. But
Excellent.
Anyway, quotation marks and lay versus lie.
You're going to hate me for this, but your first, the lay versus lie, I think I often avoid it when I'm writing something. I just go in a different direction. But that's
better than getting it wrong.
That's
really,
true. Yeah, that's right.
It definitely marks you as someone who doesn't know what you're talking about.
A man's got to know his limitations. But
yes.
Faye, thank you so much for joining the Hollywood in Total podcast. I really want everyone to check out Christmas Karol. It's a great book for this time of the year, but honestly, any time of the year. I know there's a seasonal element, but the story, the messages, the themes, it really does matter, and you can read it anytime. I just think that this is an extra better time to check it out. And of course, visit faithkmore.com. You can get updates on your work, and also if you need an editor, Faith is here to help you out. She just shared a couple of tips. She's got a lot more. You could also follow her YouTube channel as well for even more seasoned, experienced tips from an expert. Thanks so much, Faith. And I'd be remiss to not say, give your dad our best, because he's been so kind to me over the years, and he's just the best. And as you are too.
I absolutely
so I
will.
appreciate it.
And yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I absolutely will. Thank you.
Being a film critic means you missed out on some great TV. This is embarrassing, but it took me years to catch up with Breaking Bad. Everyone said it was amazing. I get it, but I just didn't have the time. I was too busy watching new films. The good, the bad, the marvels. That's my excuse for missing the boat on The Office during its run. Well, I just fixed that. Yeah, 10 years late, but better late than never. My family and I binged watched the whole 9-season run of the show. Night after night, week after week, month after month. Sometimes we watch 4 episodes in a single night. It was glorious. It is every bit as good as what everyone has said. And I adored it, and I'm sad that it's over. And there's so much you can say about the show, but I feel like a lot of it has been said because, again, ended 10 years ago. People have already said all they wanted to say about it. But there's one part of the show's success that I really want to draw a little more attention to because I think it deserves it. It's Jim and Pam. And we love their courtship, and we wanted them to get together so badly for the first time we saw them together. They would flirt, they would laugh, they would they would pull off pranks on Dwight together. It was amazing. Even though Pam didn't quite know it yet, she was engaged to someone else, of course. But what I loved about The Office was what the show did once they did finally get together. You know, at this point in a lot of TV shows, the tension just goes away. The will they or won't they? That's the magic of some of these episodes, some of these series. A lot of shows have delayed the inevitable. We're going to make you wait and keep you on the edge of your seat because they know once the show's couple gets together, well, then some of the tension is gone. Some of the magic is gone. Some of the romance is gone. It's not always easy. Think about classic couples like Sam and Diane, Chandler and Monica, Dave and Maddie. You know, they all weren't as exciting to a degree once they became a couple, officially. But The Office stayed true to both Jim and Pam and what their courtship meant to the show and to each other, really. Now, of course, they got married, they had 2 kids, and in the later seasons, they really did struggle with what seemed like to everyone a perfect storybook romance. Yeah, I'm sorry. Life doesn't work that way, even in the best of situations. Later on, Jim got a job in Philly, and that put a huge strain in their marriage. The separation, the physical separation hurt, but so did the bad communication. Boy, Jim was tone deaf on more than a few occasions, but you know, it does happen. And of course, having 2 young kids isn't easy either. A lot of pressure, a lot of strain financially, and of course, there's so little sleep. But the show's writers didn't give up on them and didn't write them off as not important. They treated each stage of their relationship with a lot of care. Even when the show lost its way a little bit, I think the 9th season definitely, it was time to check out, but they made the miscues between them funny, but also relatable. You could connect with what they were going through. And by the end, there was even the slight fear that our favorite couple might even go to divorce court. Now, we all know what happened at the end. It's 10 years old. You saw it before me. But watching it over a period of months together in this very compressed fashion showed me how much the show's writers cared about Jim and Pam. They give The Office its heart in more ways than one. Alrighty, another show in the can. Thank you to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And while I have your attention, I hope you'll drop by HollywoodInToto.com. I update it 7 days a week. You've got news, reviews, commentary, you name it, it's there. And of course, like this show, it's the right take on entertainment. See you next time.
It's Superstart Battery Month at O'Reilly Auto Parts. Get up to a $25 gift card after rebate with the purchase of select Superstart batteries. Our professional parts people will test your old battery for free and recommend the right battery for your vehicle. For power, performance, and reliability, choose Superstart batteries only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.